So the war happened, was over, not rather quickly, in 5 or 6 days. But this was, we were all packed up, by the way. This was going to be in January. The START treaty was to happen in January. So we had packed up, all the clothes for the winter. I had packed up my boots, my heavy, everything that was. Well, there we were. And so nothing much happened. Susan said, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll just have to wait. We waited. Once in a while, she and I would talk, and nothing was happening. All of a sudden, she called me in June. She said, Nancy, I want you to watch television tomorrow. She said, you're going to watch something interesting. I said, okay. So the next day, I got up in the morning. My husband and I were watching television, and Gorbachev invited President Bush to do the START treaty. And there it was. So Susan said, when we move fast. She said, you've got to be ready in 2 days. Meanwhile, are the ducks done? Were the ducks done? We weren't sure they were done. I had to go to Bridgeport fast and make sure that they were done and they were okay and they were all packed in and so forth. They were sent to Westover Field. I started taking out all my heavy clothes and changing them to hot clothes. But, I didn't think much about it. I figured I'm going to be in jeans and I don't need any dressy clothes. My daughter, Susan, came to me and she said, Mom, you really ought to take a few dressy clothes. So I reluctantly put in a few things that I thought maybe, because I figured I'm going to be in the trenches digging. What do I do? I don't need, And I don't think this way. They were coming in a C-5 plane. A C-5 plane is the largest plane. It's not called the C-5 anymore because there have been other iterations. But it's so big that it takes tanks, and it takes big cars. It takes everything. So all of this 15 tons of stuff was packed into this plane, if you can believe it. Fortunately, the ducks were all set. They were all named. They had their names on them. They were in boxes. And everything was put into this plane. Where passengers might sit, it was just a big hole, and there were seats there, but it wasn't like a regular plane. So my 5 guys had to go down there, and then there were a whole bunch of Secret Service people who were sitting there, and they were kind of seats, but they weren't like what I'm going to tell you about. The plane landed, and down came Susan Porter Rose. We had never met, but we had been on the telephone so often, we felt like we knew each other. She was very pretty and very sweet and very, very accommodating. She said, how would you like to sit in the co-pilot's seat when we take off? I said, what? She said, yeah. So I got next to the captain of the plane, and there I am with these great big headphones on, and I hear all the stuff that's going on, from the up there to the ground and all the stuff. And this big bird, which is huge, takes off. There I am. Well, after that, I then went back to the living room. Susan said, well, it's time to have dinner. So there was this lovely young cadet, whoever he was, and he was our waiter. He brought us a glass of wine and this wonderful dinner, and she and I talked and sort of whatever. And she said, well, it's time to go to bed. I said, oh, yeah, really? She said, well, get into your jammies and go in. This is your room. So I had a real room, a real bedroom. Apparently, this is the way one travels when one is with this sort of person and under these circumstances. I got into my jammies and I went to sleep. Woke up in London, just outside London, where there was an airport. And then we got on another plane and we went to Moscow. And we got there sort of mid-afternoon. The START treaty was going to happen in a couple of days, and we weren't sure exactly when. And my men and I were put into something like a dormitory called the Sociological Institute. Turned out, we found out later that it was a place where they were training Russian soldiers, and it was their dormitory. We met some Moscow Russian people who were going to be the people who would sort of take care of us, and we talked about what the agenda was for the next few days. Went to sleep. Next morning, they had a family-size like breakfast downstairs, and everything was it was like being in a college dormitory. It was very simple but very nice. It was, it was fine. We went the next morning. We went to the site, and I had heard about what the site was going to look like. I had also heard that Mrs. Gorbachev had looked at 8 different sites with Mrs. Matlock, whose husband was the ambassador to Moscow at that time. And they found the most beautiful site that ever happened in Moscow. The site was in Novo da Vinci Park, and there was a 16th century convent on the hill overlooking this. There was a pond, and it was a duck pond. And in the pond were ducks. And there was a duck house. And the minarets from this convent were sparkling, and they were gold, and they were sparkling in the water. And it was like you see in a fairy tale. It really is a beautiful, beautiful sight. I started to cry. I just couldn't believe it. It was wonderful. We met the Russians, and there was a bobcat there, and I don't know, everybody started doing whatever they were doing. Turned out many friends, and I've done this before, had given me things to bury with the ducks. But I forgot them. They were in my hotel. So I had to get somebody to go back and get them because I had all these trinkets, and God forbid that I didn't put them in. Nobody knew each other's language, but they all knew they had a common goal. They were working for their first ladies, and it was really so sweet. Everybody was so wonderful, I can't tell you. It was just marvelous. So we spent about a week doing this. Meanwhile, Mrs. Matlock, who was the ambassador's wife, came by. She took photographs of the ducks and the process, and she wanted to have some sort of record. And she was very nice. She climbed right into one of the holes we were digging. As a matter of fact, we had the ducks, which were on steel plates on the side of this ditch. And the kids were coming by, and they were doing what they had done in Wales. They were hugging and kissing them, and they didn't know the book at all, which was kind of interesting. Mrs. Matlock had invited me to Spasso House, which was the ambassador's residency, and to several events. One night, when you got there as somebody, I was now always under somebody's eye. And I had a particular necklace, a little blue necklace. If I lost that, I could not be identified. By the way, the Secret Service all had pins that were identified, and they changed them every day so nobody could ever know who or what they were. So it was very secret about what they were wearing and when they did. And I wasn't a prisoner at all, but they couldn't lose me. And one night it was raining, and we were going to Spasso House, and this driver was called in. He must have gone 150 miles per hour. I was so scared. It was a rainy, rainy night. It was black. We were in this traffic, and he was going, "Wow." I got there and I was safe. Anyway, it was fun to go to the embassy, to various events, and I was really treated very nicely. Well, the week went by, various things happened, except there was something very exciting that happened. When I came, I found that the area where we were putting the ducks was big. It was over 35 feet. It was 45 feet. But they had built a platform for the ducks. And anybody who went there was going to trip to get to the ducks. So I made them take it out. So that was the first thing that happened. Then we started putting in the cobblestones. Well, it turned out we were short of cobblestones. What were we going to do? So I talked to one of these Russians who was helping, and they were so nice. He said, well, how would you like to put some basalt? We'll get you some basalt. I said, what's that? He said, that's the stone at Red Square, and we could get the same basalt, and that would be kind of nice if we could get some of that. So I created this whole, what I would call, platform, and I integrated some of our cobblestones with the basalt on purpose. Very important, because I told Mr. Gorbachev about this later on. So then we finished, and it was crazy because Susan Porter wanted to get these guys a plane to go home. And they wanted to go home. They had had it. Somehow, the messenger who was supposed to take them to the airport went to the wrong place. There were 2 sociological institutes. And the plane is waiting for these guys, and this back and forth, and we didn't have cell phones then, and the communications were not that great. Eventually, they made it, but it was crazy because the guy was very late. The guys were all ready. The plane was leaving. Well, they made it somehow. I don't know how. The problem was that they were taken off of the job, not knowing that the plane was to leave immediately, basically. So there they were on the site, and everybody was drinking vodka as fast as they could drink it, and everybody was eating and drinking and cheering and slapping each other and hugging each other. We had finished, and it was a big party. And all of a sudden, Susan said, your plane is leaving in X number of hours. So here they had to quick get themselves together. And everybody had really put it away. So, but they got on their plane, and that was fun.